Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 15th of December of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Berlin. We have a lot of updates. I would like to remind you that yesterday talks between Ukraine and the United States of America started. They were talking about the peaceful settlement of the conflict in Ukraine, and there were lots of questions, lots of paragraphs. Most of them were discussed yesterday, but the parties decided to continue discussion today on the 15th of December of 2025, and the Witkoff and Kushner, as expected, to again push for a full withdrawal from Donbass at today's meeting, while Zelensky will continue to refuse. According to media reports, under the US plan, Russia would withdraw troops from the Kharkiv, Sumy and Dnipropetrovsk region, while Ukraine would withdraw troops just from the Donetsk region. Furthermore, today we got a very interesting article published by the Kyiv Post. They stated that Zelensky held unprecedented talks with Witkoff and Kushner in Berlin. According to the agency, yesterday's talks were the most detailed discussion of the sequencing of actions that Western officials have ever seen. Ceasefire mechanisms, security guarantees, and economic stabilization all in the same room. No one pretended that compromises would not have political consequences. Most likely they were talking about Zelensky and political consequences personally for him. Zelensky puts forward security guarantees as a precondition for any final deal, while the US proposed a multi-stage approach with guarantees gradually agreed upon. Kyiv is treating this with caution. The Ukrainian president rejected a unilateral withdrawal of troops from Donbass, but expressed a willingness to abandon Ukraine's immediate NATO aspirations. So, as we can see, lots of questions that still haven't been resolved between Ukraine, the United States of America, and the Russian Federation. And telling the truth, a minute before I started making this video, several sources stated that Zelensky rejected the idea that Ukraine must withdraw troops from Donbass at all. So, which means that if these updates are correct, this means that the negotiation process reached a dead end. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. We are waiting for official statements because this is the last day of negotiations. There are going to be no third day tomorrow or fourth day, the day after tomorrow. This is it. This is the end. This is the end of this round of talks between Ukraine and the United States of America. And right after this stage, the US representatives most likely will travel once again to the Russian Federation, and maybe this meeting will take place this week, somewhere by the end of this week, when the Americans will provide the Russians the final agreement, the final version, the final draft of agreement, and then the decision will be made by the Russians first of all. Now let's go to Ukraine. Let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first we're going to talk once again about the southern part of Ukraine, about the Odessa region. I would like to remind you that during the previous days we were talking a lot about Russian massive missile and drone strike through the entire Odessa region. We received lots of reports, updates, some pictures of Russian attacks in this area. A ship, a commercial vessel was destroyed. There was a blackout. There is still a blackout on the territory of Odessa. And just probably 3 days after the Russians began attacks, we received a few videos where we can see what exactly the Russians were attacking and how exactly the Russians were doing this. For example, in this video we can see how Russians attacked a bridge in the southwestern part of the Odessa region. So the Russians attacked this bridge through the river of Sarata, which is located in the southwestern part of Odessa region in the area of the settlement by the name of Sarata. And this is a very important bridge because, as you can see, there is a railways that go from the territory of Romania through the territory of Moldova in the direction of Ukraine, and obviously the Ukrainians were using these, let's say, railways for some military purposes. Obviously they were transferring military cargo to Ukrainian forces, and this bridge was damaged. We're not saying that the bridge was destroyed. We believe that several drones couldn't destroy the bridge, but the bridge was damaged, and the most important purpose was not to destroy the bridge, but to send a clear message to Ukraine and to Zelensky. So these attacks on the Ukrainian, let's say, transport logistic infrastructure, the purpose of these attacks, of this message, to show Zelensky if he rejects the proposals in Berlin, then Russia will enter completely different stage of the special military operation. We're not talking about quantity, we're talking about quality. This is going to be completely different special military operation when the Russians will increase the number of targets they will attack, and we understand that bridges will be included to these targets. Another video came also from this area, but from the Zatoka bridge. So this is the settlement of Zatoka. This is the most important bridge that connects the main Ukraine with the southwestern part of Ukraine, with this territory, with Romania, basically with the NATO country, and with Moldova. And Russians attacked this bridge with dozens of drones. So this video was published by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see the Zatoka bridge, and here we can see how Russians were attacking this territory with dozens of drones, maybe missiles, maybe even bombs. So during this video, the author of this video counted the number of strikes that the Russians carry out. In total, the Russians attacked the Zatoka bridge for 15 times. 15 explosions were recorded. I would like to point attention to this scene. As you can see, the Ukrainians created something like a defense barrier. There is a vessel in the sea that protects the bridge from Navy drones. Then there is another defense layer to the bottom, right at the bottom of the bridge. So Ukrainians tried to protect the bridge as much as possible with the different barriers, so with the purpose to protect the bridge from Navy drones, first of all from the Russian side, by the Russians, as we can see, attacked the bridge with drones and missiles. So the bridge was attacked. Probably this is the most correct word that we can use. The bridge probably even wasn't damaged, at least wasn't critically damaged. The bridge is malfunctioning. Ukrainians can use this, but once again, the main purpose of those attacks was not to destroy the bridge, but to send a clear signal and a clear message to Ukraine that if you reject the Russia's and the Americans' proposal on the territory of Berlin during the current talks, most likely the southwestern part of Ukraine would be cut from the mainland, because the Russians, of course, there were 15 drones, and the 15 drones probably damaged for 1%. But if Russians use 1,500 drones, then most likely they will be able to deal some damage. Now let's move further. And let's discuss the situation in the Zaporozhye direction. As I understand, is exactly the most important updates are coming from this area. You know that the Russians of the Group of Forces East continue their offensive operation. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Gulyaipole. The Russians, according to latest updates, managed to cross the river of Haichul in this area too, and the Russians began attacking on the Ukrainian side of the river. The Russians, as you can see, support their offensive operation with strikes, with artillery strikes, with aviation strikes. So there are very heavy clashes for the settlement, but the city of Gulyaipole is not the most important city on the entire Zaporozhye direction. The most important updates are coming from the area of R85 road and the river of Haichul, a bit further to the north of the city of Gulyaipole. As you can see, the map has been adjusted once again. So let's compare the map between the dates, and this is the situation by the end of the 13th of December of 2025. This is the moment when everything started. The Russians, by the end of the 14th of December, according to several pro-Russian sources, managed to cross the river of Haichul at two places. We discussed this situation, this piece of news yesterday. The Russians crossed the river to the west of the settlement of Zaporozhye, and as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to capture this stronghold. As you can see, we can recognize this stronghold from the satellites pictures. As you can see, this huge stronghold was captured as a result of offensive operation carried out by Russians. The second stronghold was captured to the west of the settlement of Dobropolye. Here we can see the same, very good quality pictures made by satellites. So this stronghold was also taken by Russians by the end of the 14th of December, according to different pro-Russian sources. They published this information. We discussed the situation. And by the end of the 15th of December, we received additional updates. First of all, the territories around these two strongholds were adjusted. based on the report that was published by a neutral mapper. So the territories the Russians captured this stronghold and territories around to the west of Dobropolye, and the Russians improved their position significantly to the west of Novozaporožje. But these two changes are not the most important thing. The most important thing is the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation about the settlement by the name of Pishchane. Today, pro-Russian sources stated that the units of the group of forces East managed to establish complete control over this small village. There are probably maybe 20 buildings and that's it, but the village was captured by the armed force of the Russian Federation, and the Russians published this video where we can see how exactly the clashes for this territory were taking place. So there are very heavy clashes for this area took place, and Russians managed to secure the area, and based on this report, based on the video, we have adjusted the map. So now we can say that Russians managed to cross the river of Haichul at 3 places. The first one to the west of the settlement of Dobropolye. Now the Russians are trying to improve their positions in this area. Furthermore, the Russians captured the territory, the foothold to the west of the settlement of Novozaporožje. This is the second area, and today, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, according to their report, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the west of the settlement of Nichayevka in the area of the settlement of Pishchane. Now we can see the full picture, and the full picture tells us that Russians are tasked to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Ternovate. So this village is the primary target for the armed forces of the Russian Federation at this stage of the negotiation process, at this stage of the entire Zaporozhye offensive, and this is the reality, and this is a very, very dangerous situation for Ukraine, because the settlement of Ternovate is located first of all on the Ukrainian side of the river of Haichul. This is the first thing. The second thing is that this settlement is located behind the Zaporozhye wall defense layer that we discussed in the previous videos. And the third and probably the most important thing is that the distance between the settlement of Ternovate in the western direction towards the settlement of Zaporozhye is already less than 65 kilometers, just 62 when talking about suburbs, even less, maybe from 55 to 65 kilometers from the possible Russian positions in coming future towards the city of Zaporozhye itself. You need to understand that for the Russians it's nothing, it's not a distance. It's not a distance because there are less defense layers and strongholds would be in front of the Russian offensive. This is the first thing. The second thing is that the city of Zaporozhye is located on the Russian side of the river of Zaporozhye, which means that Ukrainians will have less chances for good performance while defense operation. And the third thing that's most likely, this is what the Europeans are expecting right now, because you know that we have lots of talks about some proposals and some suggestions from the European countries to use the frozen Russian assets for the reparation loans, but as of now they can't do this because the legislation of the European Union doesn't allow the Europeans and the European Commission on European countries to use these frozen assets. So it's not the matter of the legislation or something like this. Obviously, this is the matter of the picture that the Europeans can see right now in front of their screens. As of now, the Europeans see no danger from the Russian Federation because the Russians are still very far from the borders with Poland. And of course, if the city of Zaporozhye falls, and this might happen within the next 6 to 9 months, obviously this situation can be used by the European Union and the European Commission for the frozen assets of the Russian Federation purposes, because from this very moment there is going to be talks like not the Russians are still somewhere far, but the Russians are already on the European side of the Dnipro River, which sounds a bit differently with every single previous statement. It's not the city of Pokrovsk or not the city of Mirnograd. This is 1 million populated area that the Russians can approach within the next 6 months, and this foothold probably currently is the most important. It's a focal point for everybody right now. So every single NATO general, every single Russian general, every single Ukrainian general, United Kingdom general, French, German general, so every single general in the world who has any connections with the special military operation, with this war, with this conflict, currently is taking a look exactly at this foothold around the settlement of Ternavata, because now the future of the special military operation is being decided. Everything depends on this foothold, whether the Russians are able to take this territory under complete control. If they can do this, then they will move further in the western direction, and the city of Zaporozhye is not the city of Pokrovsk or Mirnograd. This is a completely different situation. This is the city on the river of Dnipro, and this is completely different situation. So anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. Obviously, Ukrainians will try to do everything they can with the purpose to slow the Russians down, but at the same time, frozen assets. We understand that media picture will be completely different if Russians are able to get the city of Zaporozhye. This is going to be completely different picture for the Europeans, for the European countries. The Russians are already on the European side of the river of Dnipro. Not the Russian side, but the European side. It's a bit different picture. Okay, now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their position significantly around the settlement of Mirnograd. Today, this information was provided by neutral mappers. The Russians improved their positions. They took under control several very strategical infrastructural objects. The Russians managed to capture the mine of Novator, the elevation of Novator, this mine of Rodinska. So this, let's say, strategical point was taken by Russians. Furthermore, the Russians improved their position significantly in the southwestern part of the city of Mirnograd. So the news is tightening. Ukrainians are losing control, and probably we can start counting days. Another important video came to us from the area of the Olimpiyskaya Street. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources from the 79th Brigade, and here we can see how Ukrainians were counter-attacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the territory of farms. So in this video we can see how a Ukrainian tank entered the territory of farms and how Ukrainians were attacking Russian units on these positions. This video confirms that these farms were under Russian control when the tank was counter-attacking. So Ukrainian tank entered this territory through the Olimpiyskaya Street, and somewhere from these positions the Ukrainians were attacking these barracks and these hangars. So this is the situation. Based on this video, we came to the conclusion that despite the fact that Ukrainians were counter-attacking, these territories are under control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. As for the Konstantinovka direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly to the southwest of the settlement of Konstantinovka. The Russians began two small local offensive operations. The Russians now are advancing in the area of the settlement of Stepanovka, and the Russians are trying to improve their positions along N20 road with the purpose to get the intersection of roads N20 and N32. So this is the situation. The Russians are advancing, and as you can see, we have changes between the dates. As for the Siversk direction, the Russians left the city of Siversk several days ago, so this is the moment when the map was adjusted according to the city limits, and today is the 15th of December of 2025, and currently the distance between, let's say, the buildings on the edge of the city of Siversk and Russian positions in the fields to the west is already more than 3.2 kilometers. So during the previous 4 days, the Russians managed to cross 3 kilometers, just 3 days of clashes. So if we calculate the distance between this point and, let's say, the Slavenska power station, the distance is 19 kilometers, which means that Russians would be able to get the Mykolaiivka power plant probably within months, so, or even less, so within 20 to 30 days, and Russians most likely within a month. There are very high chances that the Russians will get the Mykolaiivka power plant, and from this very moment the Ukrainians Ukrainians will begin a total and massive evacuation of the cities of Slaviansk and Kramatorsk if nothing happens during the negotiation process. But telling the truth, I don't believe the negotiation process. Probably this process would be postponed for summer or spring of 2026. As for the Kupiansk direction, there are very heavy clashes along the entire river of Oskol. The Russians are attacking, the Ukrainians are counter-attacking. The Russians are trying to to carry out assault operation on the village of Korovy Yar with the purpose to shorten the distance to the river of Oskol, with the purpose to establish complete fire control over the logistic between the mainland and the settlement of Borovo from the south. The Russians managed to encircle Ukrainians on the territory of the village of Boguslavka from the south and from the north. In coming days, they will try to cut this pocket. At the same time, the Ukrainians counter-attack in the area of the city of Kupiansk during the previous 24 hours. Some changes were recorded according to pro-Russian sources. The Russians have less and less territories under their control on the western bank of the river of Oskol. It seems that the Russians at the end would be forced to fall back from this territory. As for the Kharkiv direction, the Russians began offensive operation along the road between the city of Volchansk and the border in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. The Russians began assault operation on the settlement of Vovchi Hutory. The Russians began bombing and attacking this territory. It seems that the Russians are going to establish complete control over the border between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. So we're talking about, first of all, about this line. This could be used by Russians something like a buffer zone, and the Russians may try to connect the Russian foothold along the eastern border with the northern border, and then to begin their major offensive operation in the southern direction. So everything is possible, and of course everything first of all depends on the results of talks that are currently taking place in Berlin. Let's wait and see. The next days are going to be very interesting. And that's it for today. Military with Summary channel reminds to weaken the many violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.